Hello, and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, we're talking about Kenshin the Beginning. Myself, Paul, and Riki had a lot of fun the last couple weeks. Really, the last week. It just felt like longer because we did 4 episodes in 4 days, talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender. And it's gotten us, remembering how much the three of us really enjoy our conversations. But also, I think it got a lot of us thinking about anime that get translated into television, and also just martial arts stuff and things like that. And so it is possible that some combination of us will be talking about One Piece at some point on this podcast. But it also reminded us that we had not finished out the Kenshin movies, the Rurouni Kenshin movies that we'd done a couple episodes about in the past. And today we're talking about one of the last two. They were released at the same time. Rurouni Kenshin, the beginning, and then the last one is the finale. Today we're talking specifically about the beginning. And Riki is laughing, I think, because of my pronunciation, but I'm not sure. But Riki, how are we doing today?
I'm laughing because, yes, I looked up the releases, and I think there's 5 movies, live-action movies total. And as you just mentioned, these 2 were released in Japan together in theaters, and it's the beginning and the finale.
Right.
It's the beginning.
The story.
It's the beginning and the final.
The final.
Just to be clear in terms of the English titles.
And in terms of this one we're talking about today, I've never more desired a backstory to my backstory.
That's very fair.
Like, this movie is the backstory to the primary story of the anime and manga, and yet we're still thrown right into it, and he's already a sword master, and we're kind of like, how'd you get so good, my friend?
Yeah.
So, funny story, I watched the animated movie, or movies, depending on how you look at it, I guess. There's like 4 chapters, and it's in 2 DVD sets, and anyway. And it is what this is adapted from, although I guess that's originally adapted from the manga, so however you want to see it. And it starts off with Shinta in this caravan who get attacked by bandits, and then everybody gets killed. He's protected by these women who then get killed. And then this sword master shows up and kills everybody. And then Shinta buries everybody, and the sword master comes back to see that he's buried everybody. And he's like, I see that you've buried all of, the enemies along with like your fallen dead, like your friends and family. And Shinta's like, well, they're all dead bodies, so I buried them all. Also, that wasn't my friends and family. Those were slavers who had kidnapped me and whatever. And then he's like, Shinta is too weak a name for a swordsman. I will call you Kenshin. And then there's like 5 minutes of them training. And,
okay.
And then there's like a little more. So in the animated version,
we get a proper training montage.
We do. We get a proper training montage.
I do love one of those.
The entire story is kind of bookended by this proper training montage in the beginning, and then a proper, killing montage at the end, instead of like a single battle scene.
Let's back up a little bit, because I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners...
Spoilers for the animated, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, this is going to be all the spoilers. And I'm hoping some of you have seen the movie. If not, I do recommend you doing so, or at least seeing some of the Kenshin stories. This is not my favorite of the Kenshin movies, but I do think that they're all very good. And some of them are particularly wonderful. I'm not as huge a fan of the anime, but many, many people are. And I think I definitely can tell why. Can we start, though, just to help catch people up? Can one of you give just kind of like a 60-second explanation of the overall character, and then we can talk about this specific movie? But just like, if someone asks you, like, who is Rurouni Kenshin? What are these movies and TV shows about?
Well, let's see. He's a like we've been saying, this is his backstory to the anime and manga, in that he is a wandering Rurouni, It's another name for like Ronin, that you might be
Uh,
more familiar with. He's a wandering warrior who has forsaken killing. And in the primary storyline, he uses what is it called? Sakabato, the reverse sword. So his katana, the front part of the katana is not a blade; it's blunt, and his blade is on the backside, which is reversed from a katana, normal katana, and doesn't make much sense. But that's how he fights, because he has decided to no longer kill people, or in the Japanese, to cut people, implying killing. And he goes on like these adventures and saves people in Meiji era Japan, the period right after the nation of Japan was reopened to the world, forcibly reopened by the American ships of Commodore Perry, and went through a transition period. So this is like after that, and there's some amount of chaos and banditry in the world in Japan, and he's going around just helping ordinary people and stopping the bandits and stopping some of the criminal elements who are trying to capitalize on the world, being open to them now, weapons trades, drug trades, etc.
Yeah, it's so for those who don't know too much about that history, this is in like the 1870s, and it's a pretty chaotic time. As Riki was saying, it's the establishment of a national government and a much more sort of Western style government when it had been very feudal and disorganized with the shoguns kind of running everything. And that war is the background, but then really comes into the foreground during this movie. Paul, you want to give us just
I sorry, I would say that it wasn't disorganized. Like the Tokugawa Bakufu shogunate was like incredibly organized and centralized, right?
Mhm.
But it was deemed. I mean, people decided. A bunch of people decided that that's not what Japan needed as a nation to confront the world powers at that time, and then that they needed to modernize. And a lot of the elements of the shogunate were against that. They were more traditionalist. So
Right.
that there was this period of revolution and uprising. And yes, like that's chaotic. But I would say that the Bakufu, the shogunate, was the stabilizing force. And that's one of the arguments that several of the characters in this movie make, is that the shogunate maintained peace for 300 years, and now you're causing this chaos.
Right.
But also, like, it was peace through oppression, right? Like, there was a rigid caste system, and
Yeah.
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
Something that I wouldn't call peace, but that people call peace.
Right.
I mean, I would say we don't have peace in the United States, but
one of the things that I think is very ironic, and I'm a political junkie, and so I always wished the show would explore this more, the movies, and it doesn't really, but it does touch on it some, is that, like, if any of you have seen the movie The Last Samurai, which is by no means an accurate depiction, it's Dances with Samurai, very much in the Dances with Wolves, it's the white savior
Yeah.
story, but it's about this same period of history, but from the other side, because part of the modernization was an attempt to really get rid of the samurai culture, and which through one set of eyes was very, traditional and beautiful and powerful and helped to maintain peace. And through another set of eyes was very caste based and rigid and was often very corrupt. And the books and books in history on who's right or wrong in that. But what I thought was really interesting about this show and these movies, and it's actually called out here, is so the anti-shogunate forces, the people who are trying to restore the emperor, hence it's called the Meiji Restoration, are anti-samurai, and our hero Kenshin is a samurai and is described by many people, or at least that's the word many people use for him, and is fighting for the emperor, for the Meiji forces, which I'm sure is a part of the history and makes sense, but it's one of the things where I'm like, I want you to focus on that. Tell me more about what's happening there. But that's not really what this movie is about.
Yeah, like go ahead.
It's complicated, because when you just say samurai, like that evokes a certain image, right, of the swordsman. but as we mentioned earlier, like it's a whole caste system. So
Right.
people, yeah, it's complicated because everyone fighting essentially with swords are samurai, because those are the people who were allowed to carry swords and who are trained in the art. And then at the end of this movie, like we see the battle, and there are like regular conscripted soldiers with
Mhm.
rifles, with guns, or with like spears. I think was another
Mhm.
weapon they used. So that was part of what was going on, was like breaking down the caste system. And yeah, like there were samurai who were interested in breaking down the caste system, often because their like families or their regions were less powerful. So they were seeking
Right.
power by breaking down the system that kept them down low. So, well, I don't know if we're gonna get to this now, but one of the characters in the story is a real person.
Mm.
The basically the guy who is Kenshin's boss in this.
Katsura.
Yeah, Katsura. What's his name? Katsura Kogoro was a real person, and he was one of basically the three founders of the Meiji Restoration. And so, like, everything going on here is in the backdrop of real history, and the fact
Right.
that they have a real historical figure who participated in all this, kind of being the puppet master, so to speak. I found that to be the most interesting part of this
Mhm.
particular movie, and the way that he is using Kenshin as an assassin to kill his enemies has just like, I don't know. There are other stories that get told like this in like real history. I think we see stuff in like the American Revolution, what the Three Musketeers, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
French Revolution, where it's like, well, like here's the story of like these heroes that we don't talk about in history because we can't.
Right. Yeah, I mean, how many stories are told as like there was a real life plot to assassinate Hitler. There were numerous plots like that, and then that's been fictionalized 100 different times in 100 different ways. There have been numerous stories about, um, fictionalized people set against the background of our own American Civil War, some of which are incredibly historic, some of which show Abraham Lincoln killing vampires. So, like, there's a wide range, and I will
Yeah,
say that I'm not sure which that particular story does more violence to, American Civil War history or vampire mythology, but it clearly is violent to both. But that's another story for another time. Um, Let me kind of try to do a quick summary of this movie, and please fill me in with some of the details and stuff. Um, so as we said, this is now set a couple of years before the main movies and the show and things like that. And one thing that was established in the earlier movies that I don't know if it's established in the anime as well, but please tell me one way or the other, is that at some point during the war, one of the people he was supposed to assassinate, he kind of did it at the guy's bachelor party. Like, not in the American sense today, but it was like a guy with a bunch of his friends. His friends had taken him out drinking because he was going to get married the next day. And Kenshin had to kill this guy, and this guy just refused to die. And he kept getting back up and trying to keep fighting, because he, as he kept saying, I have something to live for. Um, Watching it happen here, there's a part of me that wonders, why doesn't he just shut the hell up and let Kenshin walk away?
Yeah, like, stop picking up your sword, dude. just
play
play
dead.
dead.
Play
Play
dead.
dead. You might be okay.
But putting that aside, like, we've known for a while that incident was a big part of what sort of made Kenshin like feel really bad about this time and like want to not do this again. And this movie goes into more detail about how that happened, but is mostly set still after that has happened, and he is still working for I'm sorry, what was the name of that guy who he's working for? The
that's right.
Patra, thank you. I was watching it in subtitles, so I didn't hear it all necessarily. I mean, I was hearing it, but I couldn't pick out the individual words. And he's doing his assassinations. The shogunate forces are trying to really dial in on stopping him. They come after him a few times, and it's decided that he should go off into the woods to kind of be at this cabin with a woman who has been spending more and more time around their gang, and he's kind of adopted her. And there's a little bit of like, is he kind of seeing her as a little sister? Is he kind of seeing her as like, there's a potential flirtation there? It's very, very chaste. But the two of them go off together and spend this time, basically it's them against the world, hiding from the world. It's beautifully done. The two kind of fall for each other, and they start to build a romance together and start to build, a little bit of the life together. But all the time, he is still in contact with one of his friends from back in Kyoto, I think it is. And we learn that there's a spy in that organization. And part of why they have him away is that until they figure out a spy. Coming as a great shock to anybody who has never seen a movie before, we do learn that the woman he's with is herself the spy, that there is major spoilers here, that she has been trying to target him from the beginning, because as we learn, she is the woman who the guy who was killed was going to marry. So she has this real like vengeance thing against Kenshin. But of course, she has really fallen for him. And as these kind of things play out, she kind of tries to maybe stop it, but doesn't have a chance to. Kenshin walks into a trap, and they almost kill Kenshin. Apparently, Ewoks have been flown in because it's a very Ewok kind of, just all the sorts of forest things happening. That's kind of
there
fantastic.
are traps in the woods. Yeah, Ewoks, or like, what's it called? Some like Viet Cong, like you can, I think jumping to Ewoks is fun. That just shows how formative Return of the Jedi is in your view.
That's very fair. I'm probably being horribly insulting, and I apologize. Yeah, it is a very well done set of bombs and traps that almost kill Kenshin, and he's forced into a battle with the big bad. And again, is a huge shock to nobody who's ever seen a movie before. The woman runs out and tries to save Kenshin, and in so doing, does save Kenshin. Yeah. And Kenshin gets a final sword blow in when he's blinded and winds up killing both the big bad and her. And we learn then that is, she had initially been saying to him, like, hey, do you need to keep fighting? Do you need to keep fighting? And challenging him, because he kept saying that, he really does believe in this idea that the Meiji are going to, bring about this new era of peace and goodness and everything. And she's saying, like, how can you kill your way to peace? And the end of the movie is him kind of recalling her words and realizing, like, I will not kill it. I mean,
killing his way to peace.
Well, he doesn't quite give it up, though, because what he says, though, is that I must actually kill even more to make sure we get to this era of peace, and then I will give it up forever. Yeah, so who wants to fill in details I missed? Names, so that we don't just keep saying the woman, the big bad.
Tomoe.
Yeah, is it Tomoe? Tomoe?
Tomoe.
Tomoe? Okay.
It's 3 syllables. Tomoe.
Tomoe.
Yeah, and then like Saito is there, who's in all the other stories. He's like a large. Well, maybe he's not in all the other stories. Was he in the first one?
He's the cop.
Okay, yeah. How many have you seen, by the way? Just first.
The 3. The 3.
Oh,
on
the
Netflix.
3. You've seen all 3 of those ones. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, so the final. It's so confusing the way they made the movies, and then because like the first, second, and third movies they made, only the first of that's basically a trilogy, and only the first of those is on Netflix, and then the fourth and fifth movies they made are really the first and fifth chronologically, the beginning and the final, which actually the final was released before the beginning.
Yeah, and
they were in theaters at the same time. Yeah, they were actually concurrently released.
At Mary's suggestion, I watched this machete style, but I think that's the word for like the viewing order that suggested, not machete style, the viewing order that suggested for the Star Wars movies, where it
Oh.
suggested that you watch A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, then the second and third prequels, and then Return of the Jedi. So what Mary had me do was we watched the finale, the final,
Yeah.
which is mostly about the little brother who is
Right,
introduced to
right.
this movie.
Yeah.
And up to the point where that little brother goes like, I'm doing this because you drove a sword into the heart of my sister. And then
Yeah.
Mary was like, pause. Now let's go watch the beginning. So,
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
which
I
I
guess
think
that's the way
actually
to do it.
is a bad way to do it, because then everything had been spoiled for
Yeah,
me
yeah.
of that movie. But we've already spoiled it for you too. So listeners, you may as well do that.
Sure. And you can watch different versions where maybe something different happens. Who knows?
Yeah. Let's talk about I think there's a couple of different parts of this movie that are really interesting to talk about. Some of the ethics questions, obviously. I want to go into the history with you, Riki, especially. But Paul, the question that I wanted to start with, and I should be curious, both your thoughts on this. If I study a way of fighting, and I'm not studying anything around that, I'm just I learned how to be a really good swordsman. I learned how to be a really good fighter, puncher, whatever. Is that by definition a martial art? Or is a martial art something different?
I would say, speaking as a martial artist, who has studied martial arts and not martial arts, I would say, no, that's not what a martial art is.
Mhm.
That's what a style of fighting is. That's what a fighting system is.
Right.
It's a different thing. I mean, the thing that distinguishes a martial art from a system of fighting is like basically the word art, is the idea that is a way of something, and that there is some philosophy that goes along with it. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be some big ethical philosophy or whatever.
Right.
But and when I say I've studied a style of fighting that's not a martial art, which some people might disagree and take exception to and whatever, I'm talking about Krav Maga, with a way to defend yourself and others, but it's like a super practical, at least the way I was taught, right? The way I was taught was like, this is a system of fighting. This is not an art, right?
Right.
That doesn't mean it can't be interpreted another way. And I'm sure there's people in the world somewhere who feel differently. Right. Whereas when I took Taekwondo, when I studied Taekwondo for decades and became a teacher, one of the first things, like there's a sheet of paper you get that's like Hana, dual, set, net. It like teaches you the numbers in Korean. It teaches this and that, the tenets of like there's tenets, and then it's like there's a definition of Taekwondo that's like it's more than a way of kicking and punching. It's also a way of life and this and that, so I would say the notion of a martial art is that there are things that go along with the fighting style that the fighting style is not the martial art. That is an aspect of it, basically.
Well, and so I'm asking because I'm asking because one of the things I was wondering while watching this movie is Kenshin a martial artist? And I know that there is, I believe it's called Kendo, which is a Japanese martial art of swords. I don't know though, as in watching these movies, I don't know if that's specifically what he is doing in terms of sword fighting, but even just without that specific idea, would you call Kenshin a martial artist?
I would, absolutely. And I can offer more insight on what his exact martial art is, but I don't know if you want to touch in.
I was going to ask what they mentioned his style.
Yeah.
When he's first introduced to Katsura, he says, "Oh, you use the something style."
Kiten Mitsurugi Ryu.
Yeah.
Which they translate to high heaven style or something.
Mm-hmm.
But they never translate it in the anime. They just say Kiten Mitsurugi and Ryu sometimes. They also name a bunch of attacks. Like there's the final attack and he has to go learn it. And then he has to say the name of it. And everybody watching has to be like, oh, it's it's this. And then, so in true anime style, right? But
that is absolutely anime style, because when you're a kid and you're watching these and you play with your friends, you want to shout out the name of the move that you're mimicking.
Exactly. Because you're obviously not doing the move, right?
Right.
But
I have recently watched all of the One Piece live action, in which shouting out the name of the move is a very common practice.
Yeah. And I mean, I do know that in Kendo, actually, What is men the Japanese word for head?
Yeah, or face.
Right. So apparently, like, there's a thing where you shout that and like do a particular overhead swing at people's heads. Like, this is actually a thing, right? Like,
absolutely.
but like you say it when you do it. I have not practiced kendo. I know nothing technical about sword fighting. I know that there's kendo and kenjutsu, and that like the do versus the jitsu has a different meaning, right? And the do is more of a way or an art, and jitsu is more like skill, right? Like technique. Yeah.
Okay.
And my taekwondo teacher, it's not like taekwonjitsu, although I don't know if they would use that suffix exactly. But like would often talk about the difference between the art and the way, and the art and the way, or the skill and the technique. And that, if you're just practicing the technique, like you're not really getting what we're doing in a martial arts school, in a dojang or in a dojo, and
right.
And Hitamitsurugi Ryu is definitely the style. Like, he has a confrontation with his teacher. He's like, people are suffering out there. There's like oppression and all this bad stuff's happening, and I want to go help. And the teacher's like, this is not what, our martial art, our art is for. It's like, it's for wandering around and then slaughtering 100 bandits to save one kid,
Right.
But like, and he likes to drink sake like a lot. And but so basically I would say that like it is very clearly in the animation, whereas here clearly you were left with kind of an absence of that, right? Like you didn't, and maybe if you watched all 5 movies you get more of that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I wasn't sure, because I think that is kind of similar to understand. Like, I was kind of thinking, like, if someone just went and studied fencing for a while, not necessarily even just for the sport of it, but for the like, like 19th century English gentleman, you grow up learning how to sword fight.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a martial art in that same kind of a way.
Right.
But that certainly by the time of the anime, when he is part of the school of the woman and that he is with, and they're raising kids together, she seems to definitely be running her school as a martial arts school of sword fighting. I was just kind of looking at it here and this as like, is he a martial artist at this point, or is he just a very trained swords person?
Yeah, he's definitely a martial artist with a very specific specific martial art is what I would say. And
I just looked it up because I was curious, and Hiten Mitsurugi is, as far as I can tell, a fictional fighting style.
Right. Yeah.
In this universe, but it's described as developed to allow single samurai to defeat numerous foes single-handedly, which obviously he does multiple times.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And there's a lot of like jumping and coming down from above, and then also being able to anticipate opponents' movements by reading their emotions, and the anime goes into it like very deeply. Like a typical episode as the series goes on, like when there's like these really big kind of showdown fights, is like they're facing each other, there's some dialogue, and there's usually some bystanders who are commenting on like, oh, now he has beyond godlike speed. Like, how is it, and talking about, oh, but if he's already wounded, can he possibly do this? And, and then there's like 2 or 3 sword strikes, and it's like, that's the fight,
Right.
And spoilers, Kenshin usually wins. But yeah, it's like, there's a lot of depth about what the style is, but it is a fictional style. And,
I'm only chuckling here because, recently I rewatched all of the Rocky movies, and one of the things, and that kind of like defined the individual sportsman cliche in a lot of ways, trope.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is constant is that the announcers are like announcing the fight, and they're often talking about, oh, look, he's using this technique, and oh, what a powerful right hand that was, and in a way that's very similar to what you're talking about. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. And I was thinking about boxing in terms of like, is that a martial art? Like, would you call that a martial art? And it's like, you can like, no, but it could be, and there's certain types of boxing that are martial arts.
Yeah, that makes sense. And certainly what I was saying before about the, learning defense, I definitely would think that, there were some schools of teaching that kind of fighting that would be where it is much more like, a swordsman knows to never, when you're learning sort of maxims as to how to practice your life as well.
Right. Yeah.
That is much, and a philosophy to it, things like that is much more of a martial art. Let's shift to the history question. And Riki, let me just start by asking you, and then I want to get into kind of wherever your thoughts want to go. But my understanding is that, I've done a lot of reading about this from the outside, that the sort of historical legacy of this period for a long time was very, very positive. This, brought capitalism and industrialization to Japan and brought it into be, the modern nation that it was, and all this kind of thing. But that, as in many countries where there might be some thought that massive capitalist industrialization is not the best thing in the world to happen to all these countries, let alone some of the like, yay, Westernism. I'm painting in massive, massive generalities here, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, for you growing up, or, from your family or from wherever you first learned about this, when did you first learn about this period of history, and sort of what was it presented as like, this is a great period in Japanese history, or this is where it all went wrong, or, just, hey, these are the thing that happened? What was kind of your, however you want to approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I took Japanese history like in a Japanese school, so like I basically learned the junior high school-ish history of the country. Actually, the first thing I want to say about this is the subtitles at the beginning of this movie. Oh, did you catch that, Paul?
I did. So I don't speak Japanese, but I can read some kanji because, from Chinese. And there were numerous things that I was just like, I don't think what that is saying is the same thing as that is saying.
Well,
or that's not even mentioning like certain, I don't know.
I mean, it's not going to be
right.
It's not going to be a one-to-one.
Yeah,
thing.
Of course.
But the thing that just completely gobsmacked me was that the subtitles call it the Tokunaga shogunate.
Oh yeah.
When it is Tokugawa.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing, right? Like it's real history. And they just, like I said, it's something every person learns in high school.
Yeah.
So it would be like, like we talk about Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, if it just said like Abraham Lincoln or something.
Right.
Like,
or like left
what
out
the heck?
L or something.
Like how do you get this wrong?
Yeah.
So I just like, it threw me off so much at the beginning. As for your question, Matthew, impression of history, I guess, is that this was a positive. The Meiji Restoration is, I believe, universally viewed as a positive thing in terms of Japanese history. And it's often presented as, look at what happened to other Asian nations. They were colonized by European countries. China, went through the whole opium thing and like multiple rebellions and wars, and Japan maintained its independence. We were never colonized by the West because we saw what we needed to do and we did it. It is the narrative that I would say that I grew up with about this period of history.
That makes sense.
One impression that I've gotten from just what I've read, which is much more limited, is that like there's an idea of, yes, we are going to modernize and industrialize, but we're going to do so in like a conscious way that's proactive, where we're trying to also preserve like our national identity and culture and not let someone else like do that to us, basically, right? Like not get colonized, not be industrialized from the outside, but be like more in control of our own destiny. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because style of clothing wise and culture, like Japan imported all of that, and it was very in vogue
Mhm.
to dress in a Western style.
Mhm.
And
What
and
one
there,
of the
like culturally, there was definitely a if you continue to dress in the old style, like you're old, like you're not keeping up with the times.
one of I thought my favorite moments in the movie, which just shows this so well, is you see a couple of women outside of a wedding, and the bride comes out in the very traditional Western like white dress and veil, and they're talking about both how strange it is, but that they're like, oh yeah, actually, she looks good in white. Like, and I just thought that was such a perfect illustration of what you're talking about here. Of yeah, that they're getting used to this idea of getting, because they specifically say like she's not in a komodo, she's in this white dress.
Mhm.
One note I'll add from having watched the animated, the I don't know whether to call them originals or the earlier adaptation, because I think there were the stories in the manga first, but the anime version, that there's two different discs, and the first disc has like two chapters. Then there's a thing called historical notes, and then the second disc has two chapters and a thing called screenwriter notes, which is specifically from the translator to English, basically explaining, look, this is obviously the translation is not going to be perfect and we have to make these decisions, but what helped me is that there was so much of the story was visual, and that that there was a consciousness of leaving out some of the historical details because they wanted to focus more on the characters. But also the historical thing, I had to take a screenshot where they're talking about, I think when the shogunate came to power, it says in the aftermath of that conflict, I think in like 1600, Ieyasu amassed great wealth and unlimited power. Was appointed shogun by the emperor. I was like, oh wow. Having just mentioned that on the other cast, I thought,
Well,
that phrase was funny.
For sure. One thing that really struck me as I was thinking about it is because I want to spend more time with these people talking about like why is this going to be better than the shogunate and getting into those things. And at first I was frustrated because it felt like Kenshin was being very naive and that he was just saying like, he didn't seem to have this very like highly educated consciousness about what was happening. It was just right now is bad and this next thing will be better. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought was like, oh no, actually that's the point. Like, yeah, probably someone like him wasn't, couldn't tell you all the ins and outs. He just saw like, yeah, right now people get killed and there's no one, dealing with it. And there's robbery and theft and all these terrible things. And these folks have come along and said, if we win, it's going to be better. And, it makes sense. Like I do love when we dive all into the politics, but I think it's probably much more realistic that particularly in the 19th century, but even today, someone comes along and is like, hey, you think things are bad? Don't worry, I'm going to make it all better. And I'm saying that in a way that sounds very demagogic, and I think that that's very true, but also just in general, like, it is possible, I think, to be willing to join up with something when you believe that they're going to make things better without getting like deeply immersed in all the ins and outs of the technicalities and the politics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, do you think like the majority of soldiers throughout the world have like a deep understanding of the geopolitics of all the ways in which they may or may not be deployed? Like,
yeah,
no, right? It's just the idea, oh, this is the side that I think, I should be fighting for.
America was safe, then we got attacked and we're not safe. And if you go here, you're going to be safe again. Like,
yeah, that's the idea. Or like, if you go here, you'll get a paycheck,
right.
and you'll get education and whatever. And, and I feel like, in this story, we're given just like little bits of like, some people are fighting because they want to make their lives better. Kenshin is fighting because he wants to make everyone's lives better in theory, except for, the lives that he's ending. But like, different people can have different motives for the same goal, right?
Right.
And I do appreciate that it's like it's a story that doesn't tell us like necessarily like the hero's clearly right or the protagonist is clearly right, you know, and you know, the idea of like doing all this violence to then bring in an era of peace. It's like, well, either it works or it doesn't, you know. And you asked like whether it was like a sunk cost fallacy.
Right. Yeah. I asked Paul this because at some point he says, I have to keep killing because or else all the other people I've killed will be in vain. Will have been a waste.
Right. And like to me, it's like, well, either that's true or it's not true. You know, it's like in the first place, you can decide whether you want to be killing people to try and make the world better, or doing something other than killing people to make the world better, or doing nothing to make the world better. You know, like those are three options, and what your assumptions are going to determine like which of those options are the ones that make sense to you. You know, and here I think it's like half a revolution is like basically never a good thing, you know. So it's like I think it's the idea there is like if it was a good idea in the first place, then it's only a good thing to do if you actually do the whole thing. Whereas like if you go halfway, then but he does actually he gets replaced as the assassin. He's no longer the assassin after that. He just fights like some battles or whatever. The other assassin might show up in some other. No, it's definitely. It's like it's. There's a whole thing.
Okay.
that they only allude to here, right? And they actually show the face of someone who may show up somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about the historical rightness of it, and like I said, because this is a Japanese story, like written by and for a Japanese audience, I do think that it's basically baked into the story, like implied in the story, that the Meiji Restoration is correct and good.
Right.
In the same way that, you know, like in Hamilton, the American Revolution is baked into the story as like, this is good. This is what we have to do. And there's not too much debate about, you know, like, is this the right thing to do or not?
Yeah.
So that, like, for a US audience, like, that is the analogy I would make in terms of the historical perspective on whether, like, which side is right.
And also, like, maybe then you don't have to give as many details about the context, right? Because it's assumed that the audience is familiar with it in a way that, like, an American audience might not be.
Yeah. Like, there was a scene in the middle, like pretty much right in the middle, after they have tried to kill Katsura, I believe. And then Kenshin is told to leave Kyoto, right? There's like a whole series of battles, and we see kind of a long shot of Kyoto on fire. And that's actually like a very famous incident that happened amongst all these rebellions, which is, like a Japanese audience to be like, oh, I see what's going on. And we're like, Kyoto's on fire? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
But it would be like watching, I don't know, like people throwing tea off of a boat.
Right.
The US audience is immediately like, I know.
Or it's like, oh, they're going to Gettysburg. It's like, okay,
yeah. Yeah. No, that can totally make sense. And I think the point you make there is really interesting because about how, like, it is generally assumed that this is a good thing. And first of all, this is a side comment, but I just think it's worth commenting on. This just gives me one more reason of seeing how offensively, like, inaccurate The Last Samurai is, since that movie's all about the Meiji Restoration being these evil capitalists who are trying to, like, destroy this beautiful way of life of the samurai and things like that. Like, so just, it's interesting that movie has the exact opposite take of what you're talking about. I'm painting generalities here, but it's kind of an interesting subnote here. But more specifically for this one, I do think there's something interesting there because, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I haven't seen it for a couple of years, but my impression is that in a way that I think makes sense to the character, and if I understand the arc of the story, in the other in the stuff that is set after the Restoration, when he's on his own, one of the things we're learning is, okay, maybe things are overall better than they were during the Shogunate, but this is not a perfect time of peace when he can hang up his sword and never use it again. There is still lawlessness. There are still outlaws. He does still have to, there's still corrupt government officials. He does still have to take his sword and go out and fight people to protect people a lot. And with it, he doesn't do it with killing anymore. I guess what I'm saying is, am I wrong in thinking that one of the things that this is about is that the idea of, yeah, he's on the right side, but his idea of any terrible thing I do is justified because this new era is going to be wonderful and perfect and good, is maybe the naivete of his youth, because in the later show, what we're seeing is that it's not actually that as good as he might have thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with progress is, as we try to define it historically, and it's specific to this time period in Japan. As I said, like one of the biggest narratives about it is that Japan needed to modernize. Like that's the narrative the nation has told itself in its history books. Like the nation needed to modernize in order to maintain its independence. So when we say an era of peace, like I'm thinking of peace as not at war with another nation and not conquered or colonized by another nation. But I do think that what the follow-up, the anime and manga shows is that just because a nation is at peace, there's still unrest kind of at a local level.
Right. Because what Kenshin might be seeing is not, I'm thinking in those terms of colonization, he's thinking of people coming to my village and like screwing with people.
Yeah.
And that's what's still happening.
Yeah, but well, I mean, that doesn't mean it's like not different though. You know what I mean? Like it's
sure.
I think the idea is that like everything's not perfect, but I do think there's an idea that things are overall better. You know, that like samurai can't just show up and just kill someone because like they feel like it, you know, and just like, oh yeah, this person insulted me or whatever, you know, and that like people that it's different, you know, and a lot of the like he's dealing with smaller scale issues, you know, most of the time there's a whole big plot in the second and third films, which are really the third and fourth chronologically, which I think the two of you have not watched, correct? You've watched all five, Matthew?
I've seen 4.5. Oh,
okay. Yeah, so there's maybe a larger kind of thing going on there, but like the point being, like I also don't feel like he was necessarily like this is justified and like righteous. Like I feel like the character's perspective, which is, I mean, I'll say is a lot of conjecture because like dude don't say a lot of words. Like, you know, and I've seen his performance described as like too stoic. And I'm like, I feel like if you're going to describe this character, this portrayal as too stoic, like I feel like you kind of don't understand the character, but like maybe like too stoic for my taste. I can, that's fine, you know, but like, I feel like that's who this is. And it felt a lot of what's going on in terms of his emotions or his point of view is unexpressed and implied. But my take is more that like, it's not like he's like, this is the righteous whatever. It's like that he feels like this is necessary, you know, like this is the only way that we're going to get to a world that it's like people can. And to me, that's the point of this movie, right? Is that like he's doing all this killing to try and make the world a better place for like peasants, for everybody, right? And in the animated, you find out that he actually grew up as a farmer, like when he was really little, you know. But like then he actually is a farmer for like 6 months to a year, however long, for like a year, you know. And because and is happy that way, living that way in relative peace for a period of time, you know.
Right.
And so to me, that's kind of like his journey is, you know, it's not that just that he falls in love with someone who he has deeply harmed, you know, by killing her fiance. Like that's a big deal. And, you know, and then he falls in love with her in, you know, like you say, a very chaste way, which like is fine with me, you know, like that. I don't like a lot of romances, and I definitely don't like a lot of like tragic doomed romances, but like this is just one that works for me.
Oh, I just mean that like
there's not a bunch of sex scenes and heat and
right? What I more meant is that like before they go off to the cabin,
oh yeah,
you can tell there's something there, but they don't have their actual first kiss, and then it is just that until they're off in the cabin.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, both. I mean, Mary described it as the relationship of the Stoics, and they're both very sort of like express things quietly.
Yeah.
Which for me, at least, actually watching it in subtitles was perfect because so much of it is their body language and the like.
Yes.
Though I could have used with a little
love
faster
that.
pace, but go ahead.
We, you know, the three of us have been talking about the Netflix live action Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
And talking about the dialogue and just like the over explanation of things through dialogue. And one of the things that I like about this story, especially from the main character, is that he doesn't talk a lot, but he does some amazing acting in those moments. I mean, at the end of this movie, the exhaustion on his face when he's finally like, it's over. And like, I think that's all he says, like, it's over, owata, or something like that. And it's just like, but his acting is so good in that, and you just feel it. Well,
especially because, I mean, I have a fairly different take on it, at least than Paul, what you're saying in terms of my understanding of it. We'll get to what the take is specific. I'll say what it is specifically, but then I just want to make this point about his acting specifically.
Yeah.
Because to me, this feels mostly about regret and about that he had to make these great sacrifices and do a lot of things that he really didn't feel great about, especially as he learned more about what was happening in order to reach this goal. And I don't think that he's like, oh my God, now I was all wrong, I never should have done those things. But I think he's still living with the guilt is too simple a word, but I think it's kind of my point is if I feel like the character is incredibly conflicted. And part of, in the newer stuff, we've always gotten the sense of he is very conflicted about his past and thinks he was doing the right thing, but also has a lot of regrets and a lot of like mixed feelings about that. And I think we have somewhat different takes on where that winds up. But to me, I think the point is not supposed to be that they're saying, here's what he feels. It can be summarized in one sentence. It's that the writing and the acting really gives this feeling of a person who's incredibly conflicted about an incredibly complex, nuanced situation and time. And to me, that's a real, in the same way that I kind of love, you know, like other movies where we can walk away with different feelings about it. I love the uncertainty about it. I love that he doesn't have a, let me tell you exactly how I feel about the past moment.
Yeah.
Was it all worth it? Was it all worth it?
Am I a good man?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Well, it was all worth it. I mean, for him. So I feel like he regrets me, but specifically you mean killing, right? Killing people?
I mean, because that's the question that's put to him is, can you kill enough people to bring peace? Like, is that the way to bring peace? And it was funny because here we're kind of on the flip side of conversations you guys have been having with me about Avatar, in that I feel like I've become kind of the bloodthirsty one among the three of us. That I have definitely become more okay with the idea that violence is sometimes necessary as a way of working, to end political oppression or things like that. It is still not what I want necessarily, but I'm more okay with it than I was in the past when I've said I'm just strictly like, nonviolent. And I felt like in this movie, he was really wrestling with, I felt like I was more okay with the things that he wanted to do than the movie was.
It's interesting because I want to just depart briefly to talk about this as a prequel. Because like, I feel like this is exactly the type of story that I feel like I don't know what I would think if I just saw it in a vacuum. I'm actually not totally sure this might have been the first Kenshin I ever saw, the animated.
Because it's called The Beginning? You're like, oh,
No.
I'll start at the beginning.
No, it's called Trust, and then Betrayal, which is a lot more on the nose than any of the dialogue. But it's Samurai X, Rurouni Kenshin, Trust, and then Betrayal. Like, it's my wife has all of the, like, a bunch of the DVDs, right? And so she showed them to me like over 20 years ago, and these two, or this one, but what is here the beginning, I remember watching, and then also basically the beginning of, I think, the second movie of the 3 movies, which I think is the first movie that you haven't seen, Riki. I'm not sure, but so I'm trying to remember, like, whether I had seen this just in a vacuum or whether I'd actually seen, but it functions as a prequel. That's the point, right? This is a diversion. You can just, anyway, but like, so you already know that it works out to an extent, right? You know that he hangs up the sword or flips it around, basically, right? You know that he's going to go around being a wanderer and using a reverse blade sword and not killing, and that's like some of this. And so this is more like, it's one of those prequels that it's less about like, okay, what happened before that. This character go from being, Batusai to like, to Kenshin, Himura. Like, why did he become this way? And
see, that's very interesting. And that it may be that I'm misremembering the original story because I haven't seen it for a couple of years, and I think I never saw it as much as you did. And also, while I saw a good deal of I think I saw most of season 1 and like part of season 2 of the anime.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anywhere near all of it, but I did see those original movies. And what I remember is that he is very much something very different, which is that he wanted to hang up the sword entirely,
right,
but he kept feeling like he had to take it back down. And the compromise he was going to make is that he wasn't going to kill anymore. And insert 5 seconds of me saying that hitting someone in the head with a large piece of iron, no matter if it's sharp or not, is often going to cause fatality. But we'll put that aside for the moment.
Yeah, super irrelevant to
but I just had to throw it in.
Yeah, I understand.
I think relevant, but in a different way. Yeah, we'll do a full episode on that.
I mean, think to the story, it's not. I mean, put a pin in that, and there can be an episode about that.
It is asking you to accept something that I don't think you can accept, is what I mean about it being relevant. But
so I think there's an important point here in terms of the idea of that. I'm trying to figure out how this wouldn't be a whole hour conversation, but basically, so the whole like searching for a third way, right? Not wanting to kill the, certain character who's the main villain. Like, to me, that is kind of like it's like an aspirational, the idea that it is always worthwhile to try to find a nonviolent solution. Yes. And where you were saying earlier that you have become more comfortable with the idea that sometimes perhaps violence is the only way that a particular form of oppression is going to end. I feel that too. And to me, it depends. Like, the story itself to me is kind of what dictates whether I feel like killing a lot of people or never killing anyone is like the answer, and how I view characters who do go around killing a lot of people as opposed to characters who go around not killing anyone. And this character is both of those, but in very different contexts.
Right.
And I like the contrast. And I don't feel like the story itself is like looked at as a whole, like the whole character story to me is kind of basically, it's more posing the question and letting the viewer just have our own feelings and thoughts about it, rather than having a viewpoint. Yes, this is right.
I think the tangent I was trying to stop myself from whatever
Sure.
that we're on now, but I want to pull us back from, I think is a different point. I fully agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
And I think if it's framed as, I used to be intentionally killing people.
Yeah.
Now I am going to do as much as I can to fight in a non-lethal manner.
Yeah.
Recognizing that sometimes people will die, but that I'm trying, is to me very different from, I'm going to use violence that in any world should be occasionally lethal, but because I say I'm not going to kill people, that means I haven't killed. I find that whole idea just so fundamentally unbelievable that it just throws me. But like that's more important.
Sure.
Your main point, though, I think that's kind of what I'm saying is, to me, I think that is a major change. But I felt like what this movie was saying was, this is a big part of why, because he thought he did kill all these people and it did bring about something better, but also it isn't perfect and there are still problems. And look at and that part of where he was coming from was this idea of like, I'm killing the bad people, but then one of the people he killed was this decent guy who just wanted to get married. And like that this is a story of showing all the reasons why he doesn't have the clearness of mind that he did during this movie, and therefore no longer kills, no longer cuts. It's kind of more what I was understanding it to be.
Yeah, I guess I feel like he already was kind of the feeling like, this is the thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to stop doing this. You know?
Yeah, he says that directly.
Yeah. And for like, he's involved with like Tomoe, you know?
Well, that's one of the most fascinating things about his character in this one, and the way that he is acted, is that he starts off the movie looking exhausted of fighting and killing.
Yeah.
And he never enjoys it. He's never, I mean, like in a lot of other fighting anime, I feel like the main character to some degree like enjoys how powerful they are, or enjoys fighting specifically. Like Dragon Ball, Goku just likes to fight, not to inflict violence on other people, but he enjoys being strong and wants other people to be strong and fight against him. So like this character is like very different from a lot of other anime protagonists, specifically like fighting ones in that regard, in that he just like never seems to enjoy what he's doing, fighting.
Yeah. Like I think from the beginning he views violence as a tragic act, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even when he fights with reverse blade sword, he's like, he doesn't want to fight then, even, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, he's like, I'm not going to kill you, but I don't even want to fight you, you know?
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's
and the tragedy of his character is like how good he is at fighting.
Right. It's like he's the best in the world at a thing he doesn't really want to do. And there's a line in the animation where what's his name? Izuka? Who's the other spy, you know, who's collaborating, where he says like, oh, are you gonna be bored, you know, out in the mountains or whatever, doing whatever? And he's like, I don't kill people for fun. Like, you know, like, what do you mean bored? Like, I'm bored of this. I don't want to do this. I'm just doing this because I think it's and he gives one line. He doesn't give this whole explanation, you know, but like, to me, the implication is like, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not having a good time here. I'm just doing something I think I have to do, you know, that I think is going to make the world better. But like,
I mean, one thing I love so much about his story in general, but especially in this movie, is that he has this horrible experience of killing this guy the night before his wedding. And we learn even more about that one of the reasons why he first was taken on as a student was because he just had so much, like, he kept refusing to die in hard situations. Was it his teacher? I can't remember. Was it he who that? I'm sorry again. My memory for details is not the best right now. We the guy before the wedding who didn't want to die.
Yeah.
We learn in this that his like, I have to keep living, hits him really hard because of something in his past. I can't remember if it's because of his story or the story of one of his mentors. That was definitely in the movie, right? Am I misremembering this?
I don't remember.
It could have been. I watched some of it without the subtitles, and and then I went back and did that. But I also watched two different versions of the same story, like back to back.
That's fair.
There's definitely, he definitely had this like I don't want to die thing when he was little, and then he didn't die. And like there is like a unwillingness to give up, kind of.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the details, but like he definitely, that experience, like that guy. Yeah. That guy resonated with it even before he learned more about him. It's like there was this. It haunted him already.
Yeah. And my point is, I think in a lot of movies, that would have been the turning point. And he would have sworn that that's the last person he was going to kill. But he doesn't. Right. And what he says of, I'm going to stop, I have to keep killing, like is when he's telling that story to the person who he doesn't know is the wife of the person he killed, but or the fiance. But yeah, I love his story so much because it isn't simple, because it's not he did something and they changed in 180 degrees. He was different. It's, it's an evolution, and he was doing things that he didn't love for a cause that he believed in. And now he's doing things that are a little better for a cause. It's complicated.
Yeah. To me, it's like, I appreciate it because I feel like sometimes character development, character changes, a character arc is like somebody going from being one character to suddenly basically being a different character because they had some singular experience or whatever. But like, I feel like he's the same character throughout. He just gains some deeper understanding about some things and some more understanding about like what it actually even means to have a happy life, because he has one for like a minute, and then changes his behavior from killing a lot of people to not killing anyone. But like in some ways, I think his outlook doesn't necessarily fundamentally change. It's,
The thing that gets me is that he accidentally kills Tomoe and makes this vow to stop killing, right?
Yeah.
To Katsura. He's like, I'm done. But then he's like, no, we still have a little bit more to do. And then he goes to the final battle and kills a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And there's something so interesting about that, because like that should be the moment, right? It's like, oh no, I've killed the woman I love. I'm going to stop killing. Like that's basically what he says. But then he continues on because he believes so much in this mission.
Yeah.
Right.
And what you were saying, Paul, like that he doesn't change, I guess, like that he has been a constant. And it feels like the other characters change their views on him, whether it's Tomoe or Katsura, like they start to see him differently or like understand something fundamental about him that they didn't previously. And that's the character development, is like the protagonist doesn't change, the other characters' understandings of the protagonist change. It's just like a fascinating way to tell a story.
I think so.
I mean, it's a character arc. It's not a character right turn,
Yeah.
There's so much more I want to talk about. I think we're probably going to revisit the subject at least one more time, because I definitely want to talk about the last movie then, and we'll kind of maybe do an overview of the character. But unfortunately, I'm under time constraint. I've got to go right now. Listeners, we want to know your feedback. What do you think? Send us thoughts. All that's in the show notes. Send us, become members, $5 a month, all the great things. Riki, your last thoughts on this.
It's a beautiful tale, beautifully visually shown, and surprisingly deep, I think, for like kind of how little happens, or like we talk about like how little the character changes. Just talking with you two right now, like I'm filled with so many more questions and thoughts that I need to go sit on them on my own. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I would be honest, I didn't really have a wonderful time watching the movie. I enjoyed a lot of it. I think it was very powerful the way it would be like so much is told in non-verbal, but I also found it very dull. At one point, I think there was like 30 seconds between every line of dialogue for a good like 15 minutes. And it
Yeah,
just,
or more.
yeah, and it just not Mike's style of movie, but yeah, all this is like, oh, I want to watch it again. Well, wait, do what? No, I just love talking about it. But it is a great movie told in artistic style that is not my particular fancy, but it's still a very good example of that style.
Yeah, I would say I absolutely love the movie. I think it's my favorite prequel, the only prequel favorite prequel movie, and the only prequel that I like more than this prequel is the prequel series to Rogue One, Andor, and this movie does so many things that I usually often hate and like rage quit things for, but it does them in a way that does not feel manipulative to me. It just feels feels very naturalistic, and just like I love the part where nothing's happening in quotes, because so much is happening in my feeling of watching the movie, you know, like the scene where he picks up the huge daikon, you know, I think that's what he's got there, and he's like so happy, and it's like that's like almost the only time we ever see the character smile, because he just like grew a giant radish. And I think the actor Takeru Sato like does an amazing job. He also did almost all the stunts. I think most of the characters did almost all the stunts. All the scenes are shot in like one take. Not okay, that's an exaggeration, but they do a lot of scenes like one take, like just trying to have the flow. And one thing I really enjoy is just how different it feels from like a Hollywood movie.
Yes.
And that's not a slight on Hollywood movies necessarily. It's just like most of what I see are Hollywood movies, and watching movies that are not made in Hollywood is often a good reminder that it's like, that's not the only way things can be. That's not the only way you can tell a story. And I feel like this is a beautifully told story of a simple story of vengeance declined, is what I would sum it up. Because I think the story here is really like Tomoe's story. Like she's not visibly the protagonist, but like her journey of being miserable and seeking only vengeance, and then actually becoming happy, and then deciding to actually save the person who she was attempting to seek vengeance on, I think is a really interesting story, you know?
Yeah, I'm very sorry we didn't get to talk about her story, because I think it's fascinating, and probably will be a part 2 or a follow-up.
Yeah.
And I'll just say I made a joke at the beginning about how the fact that she's the spy and the fact that he accidentally kills her are very tropey and are very predictable. But I also agree that the way it is, I thought her actual death was kind of eye-rolly, but like her being the spy, I thought was done in a way that, yes, it's very much a trope, but also fit perfectly. And I think because it didn't do a lot of the Hollywood manipulative things, really worked for me.
Yeah. Also, he's blinded at the end. I'm not sure if that.
Yeah, no, that's not clear. All right. Thank you both so much. Thank you to all of our listeners. You're awesome. I gotta go.